Searches were carried out at the homes of 71 members of Zelensky's party. It looks like a rusty nail that his accomplices, or maybe even his American patrons, are throwing him onto.
Will you be sad when Zelensky resigns? This is our main news. At the beginning of the hour, the corporate media attacked Zelensky. Zelensky is in a state of complete and utter collapse and possible resignation. I mean, many people are suggesting this from inside Ukraine. Let's pay attention to all these reports coming from Newsberg, the New York Times, and the Associated Press, which, by the way, are real propaganda channels. For Zelensky, there is no more stable and reliable body within all these corporate media for mass spending and fueling further war in Ukraine than the New York Times. The New York Times has been the main instigator and promoter of the idea of destroying Ukraine.
I'll add my 2 cents. Several American and European media conglomerates at the very beginning of the war campaigned against peace agreements and demanded that Ukraine fight, and fight. It doesn't matter that Ukraine has 100 million fewer people than Russia. Ukraine is 10 times smaller. Military-industrial complexes, an army not very well equipped with modern weapons. That is, Ukraine's struggle is heroic, but without military support from a major power, it's a pointless policy. And Western journalists bet on the continuation of the war, knowing that none of the major countries will fight for Ukraine and that no one is going to give Ukraine modern weapons, especially long-range ones. At the moment of the first shock, that is when in 2022 they went to Kyiv and then fled from Kyiv, Putin's regime, well, there was a chance to stop this war, the same. The New York Times, Associated Press, European media, along with European Union politicians and the Biden administration gave Zelensky the green light, like, go ahead and continue the war. And Zelensky and the others either didn't have the guts or maybe the brains or the conscience, but they got involved in a war they were bound to lose against a superior enemy force without clear commitments from Europe or America, commitments to actually help in a meaningful way, not just with nice words, but they went on anyway. What reasons could all these people have had to demand the continuation of the war? What did they gain from it? Neither Russia nor Ukraine really interest them as territory or geography, at least not enough to shout, sacrifice tens of thousands of lives. The main thing is not to lose territory and independence. So what then? Maybe not the journalists themselves. Journalists are just hired, so to speak, attack dogs. They're aggressive when told to be aggressive and kind when told to be kind. Maybe it's those who pay their salaries who wanted something or didn't want something. Well, usually it's those people, yes, who are interested in money, meaning, so to speak, the return on investment, the percentage. There's a lot of money in war, and it's very easy to launder it. So how do you do it? Well, you order 100 tanks for, let's say, $1 billion. I have no idea how much a tank costs. You sign for receiving 100 tanks, then for sending them to the battlefield, and then you make a report to write off those 100 tanks. You can't find them, right? Because they're destroyed. That's how they embezzled $1 billion. Often the person who supposedly made them gets a cut. Part goes to the one who received them, and part to the one who confirmed they were destroyed. And the main part goes to the one who put the whole chain together, convinced everyone, prepared everything, and carried it all out. And he also attached a few mutilated tanks, just like the ones that were supposedly made and destroyed. And with 10 million bullets, it's even easier. So who counted them? Was it 10 million or 5 million who wants to sit down and count? And what's the difference in their pockets? Maybe they're even making deals with the Russians, so they also write off their tanks for the same non-existent battle on Lake Chad or something else they made up. A couple of nights, met, fought, drunk, then went their separate ways, and how much did they write off because of that? So what then? The New York Times.
Well, let's say Saint and Guardian, others suddenly started backing off, or, as we say, made a U-turn, the New York Times. In this article, it's very long, about 4,000 words, but it's about how Zelensky turned out to be a fraud. And this won't surprise you. Obviously, we're sending billions there, so how did we make sure our money would be well spent? Well, Zelensky had to set up independent boards to ensure that the most corrupt country in the world wouldn't steal or profit from the dollars. They were meant to protect their young people from dying, but now all their young people are dead.
According to the agreement, Zelensky was supposed to form several independent monitoring groups to make sure that what I described to you didn't happen and that many other abuses didn't take place. You'll probably see for yourself, but Zelensky didn't create a single such commission. When I say
that Ukrainians are doomed for a generation, I'm serious. I really am. It makes me very sad. It's probably the most devastating, the saddest thing that I'll ever show you on this show. It's the complete and total destruction of Ukrainians of childbearing age who could have gone and fought. They're gone, they're just gone. You can see it in the line graph of age distribution. The impact of the war on Ukraine's demographic structure. The population losses are shown in gray. My God, look at this. So you are witnessing a complete, absolute, and total collapse of the youth. They simply wiped out entire huge percentages, a third, a quarter of the childbearing population. It was terrible, it was evil. Don Jr. and Donald Trump are speaking out, and that's a good thing. This is what I was looking for. Look at this, oh my God, look at this sharp drop. There should be a Christmas tree structure, because at the very top are the elderly, and at the very bottom should be all the young people who are supposed to support the older generation as they leave. And look, the hourglass shape shows the loss of women and men in their prime reproductive age. This is simply devastating for any population.
But in addition to the fact that tens and hundreds of thousands of young people are dying, there's also the corruption that's driving Americans crazy.
It's one of the most amazing things I've seen. This summer, I was in Monaco with my girlfriend Bettina, just driving around on an ordinary day. Half the supercars, Bugattis, Ferraris, and others had Ukrainian license plates. We think this money was earned in Ukraine. When I visited 20 years ago, there wasn't nearly as much wealth. Meanwhile, they're also arresting another person there for stealing hundreds of millions. You hear all the rumors, and then I notice every supercar in Monaco has Bugatti plates. The rich ran away, they let the peasant class fight in these wars. And there was no incentive to stop, because as long as the money kept flowing and they were stealing it, nobody was checking anything. The leaders, the decision makers, had no reason to ever come to peace. It's no different from Putin. The sons of oligarchs weren't fighting in these wars. Instead, someone from Siberia was sent and used the war to rebuild his industry. It was clear that in Venice, the sanctions we imposed didn't help at all. They only raised oil prices, which allowed him to pay for the war with the difference and boost his industry. No one had any incentive to sit down at the negotiating table. Zelensky knew he couldn't win the election, and they kept stealing. Putin was building up his industrial base, and in the end, we had millions of young men dying for nothing.
For nothing.
Enough of this. It's clear and obvious. Benefits on both sides and the senseless deaths of young guys filled with propaganda who have just started living. It seems to me that Christianity clearly says, do not kill, and that should include not sending others to die for your own profit.
That's exactly how it was, of course, the whole last century, the First World War, the Second World War. People ask where the entire white population of the nation went, and the white population made up about 36% of the world's population at the turn of the century, but now it's decreased to about 8%. What happened there? Well, obviously, there are many reasons. Abortions, birth control pills, westernized egalitarian societies that don't encourage parents to actually have children. But I would say that a huge part of that demographic collapse is the world wars, which took millions and millions and millions of people of childbearing age in the prime of their lives. And all of them were destroyed. We were against this war. We're not for Russia, not for Ukraine. We're for America. And the best American outcome of this war is to completely stop its funding and put an end to the killing. President Trump said that yesterday. He said he's very disappointed with Zelensky. Everyone is turning against Zelensky, just like the war in Dennis. What is your next step after the negotiations last week?
So we spoke with President Putin and with the Ukrainian leaders, including Zelensky, President Zelensky. And I have to say that I'm a bit disappointed that President Zelensky hasn't read the proposal yet. That was a few hours ago. His people are excited, but he is not. Russia is not against Russia. You know, Russia, I suppose, would prefer the whole country if you think about it. But Russia, I think, is not against this. But I'm not sure that Zelensky is okay with it. His people love it, but he hasn't read it. So will you explain it to me someday?
Jeff, well, that's right. Trump is angry. Trump is angry. Have you tried saying thank you, ladies and gentlemen? This won't end well for Zelensky. I'm just predicting it right now.
Trump, it's obvious, is somewhat enraged. Both leaders, Putin and Zaya, act genuinely, but Zelensky also acts foolishly. Either Putin has better advisors or he, well, probably just has more experience. By the way, their situations are different too. Putin is fighting with his own resources, while Zelensky is fighting with donated, well, borrowed ones. But this debt will most likely continue to exist only on paper. Who will pay it back if Russia captures Ukraine? Putin or what?
But it might also be the end for Zelensky. Many are saying again that he will resign because, first of all, he lost the head of his administration, Andriy Yermak. Andriy Yermak is his right-hand man. And secondly, Zelensky was forced to resign after raids by anti-corruption forces. They conducted searches at his home, office, and government building.
Let me explain. When it became clear that Zelensky was not going to create organizations to monitor the money coming from allies, the United States decided, though I'm not entirely sure if it was the United States as a principle or specifically the Biden administration. So the doves, also hawks, are these globalists. Yes, they decided that we still need to know what's going on. And so we allocated one organization called National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, and we didn't let the president's office take it over, subordinate it. Those were our eyes in Ukraine again, though I'm not sure if they belong to intelligence officers or globalists. With Trump's arrival, National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine became not only the eyes, but also the hands. So it was National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine that carried out these very raids.
They took everything. Tucker Carlson says that Andriy Yermak cheated for $100 million. At least after this prediction. After Tucker wrote about this on Twitter, this guy was searched about 4 days later. Tucker knows, man. And now they're starting to gather together and say that Zelensky's government is falling apart one by one. I mean, 70 members of his party. By the way, they've also been searched, which kind of gets lost in the headlines. But now, 70 members of his party are involved in a scheme. Zelensky is leading the crime. Now it's provable quickly. Let's read from the New York Times.
70 members of the party who serve the people and servants of the people. 70 appointees of Zelensky and Yermak have been searched. Documents and computers have been seized. Do you think none of them will talk, that they'll just stand in line? Like, I'm first, I'm first? Zelensky is not in the best position right now, and even his drinking buddy Macron won't be able to do anything for him.
When Russian troops invaded Ukraine, the West faced a dilemma: how to spend billions without seeing the money disappear into the pockets of corrupt managers. The stakes were high. Ukraine's key wartime sectors, energy, weapons procurement, nuclear power, were run by state companies, allowing elites to plunder funds. That's why Western allies and European countries insisted on oversight. They demanded that Ukraine allow groups of external experts and supervisory boards to monitor spending. Of course, these boards were never properly established, allowing corruption to flourish. President Volodymyr Zelensky's administration staffed boards with loyalists, left some positions empty, or blocked their creation. Leaders in Kyiv even rewrote company charters to limit oversight, keeping government control and allowing hundreds of millions of dollars to be spent without outside interference. Supervisory boards perform an important oversight function, allowing independent experts, usually from other countries, to thoroughly review key decisions. Well, that's just crazy. There are not just a few named companies, like the local atomic energy company, which is accused of embezzling at least $100 million. The state atomic energy company Energoatom, that's the name of the company, $100 million, and that's just for a single company. Multiply that by the many state agencies and the entire government as a whole, as well as all the armaments, R&D, and procurement. And you have billions of dollars, just as we expected, for a very long time. Fraud, embezzlement, and theft are recorded in documents and interviews with about 20 Western and Ukrainian officials who worked closely with or sat on company boards. The Times found political interference not only in Energoatom, but also in the state-owned power companies Ukrenergo, as well as in the Ukrainian Defense Procurement Agency. Some people spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss confidential matters. Zelensky's advisor declined to comment, saying that supervisory boards were not within his competence. P.U.
Very soon they will start saying that Volodymyr was on drugs and didn't understand anything at all. Volodymyr is a good defense. By the way, yes, he can say, so Biden is allowed not to understand anything over there? He was not signing, doesn't remember anything, but I'm not allowed to. He's not being judged for it. That's discrimination.
You scroll through the article, you will see a very detailed analysis in the New York Times of exactly how this scam worked. We don't have time to read all of this right now, but let's just say it's an evidence-based report, and we can hear the birds. We've been told that this is just one of many. When they decided that Zelensky needed external pressure to end the war, when they decided that Zelensky was no longer their guy, when they decided that corruption, bribery, well, obviously stopped coming back to those who were getting the money, well, they were always going to do this to Zelensky. Zelensky was always destined to share Gaddafi's fate. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. That's exactly why New York Times, essentially, the wall that protected Zelensky has now cracked and collapsed. Here's Associated Press, everyone.
In other words, as expected, Jew Zelensky is being handed over as the main culprit of corruption and losing the war. In the unforgettable novel by Ilfin Petrov, such people were called Zasadatelstvo I Tolsko Sidiat, chairman, meaning they are kept just to be handed over.
It's very bad news when the corporate media have decided to turn against the Ukrainian thieves whom they themselves nurtured. Zelensky's chief of staff resigns after anti-corruption investigators searched his home. Many people here are talking, speculating. Zelensky was ordered to resign. He'll be taken out in handcuffs if he refuses. Ukrainian Deputy Artem Jerenik made a strong political statement, claiming those in power have been ordered to resign, top officials dismissed, appointments blocked, parliament paralyzed, the budget not passed, Western support collapsing, calling it the final blow. Did Washington officially accuse the Zelensky regime of embezzling United States taxpayers' money? Of course, this was happening openly. Don't be so foolish. They knew this would happen. They knew about it the whole time. They just let it continue because they're bloodthirsty monsters. I'm not sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, everything changes. Vladimir may be able to stay in the chair for a while longer, and today his only protection is that very presidential chair in which he might be able to keep sitting. As long as the war continues, but as soon as the war stops, even if it's just a ceasefire and not peace, he can't do anything. He is obliged to hold elections, or rather, elections will be held whether he wants it or not, and for him that's as good as death. And if they also find his assets abroad, then it will be death in solitary confinement, and most likely in a different solitary cell. His beloved wife will be in a women's prison, and the children, out of shame, will change their last name to something else, maybe after a Ford car. So subscribe and hit the bell if, of course, you want to get quality content on time. If you don't want to, then by all means, don't subscribe. Well, then, yes, there are 2 weeks left to write it off on taxes. If you make it in time, that means donations of $200 and above, any amount at all. Seriously, I'm not joking. Any amount. And our nonprofit will give you an official document. We have all the rights, all the permits, and everything else needed for the write-off. But this only works, ladies and gentlemen, for those who file taxes. Here in the United States of America, in Zanzibar, Canada, Israel, and in Ukraine, it most likely won't work. I think that's all then, ladies and gentlemen. Let's say goodbye and wait for new, wonderful, interesting, and exciting news.